Now, caste is something, of course, which has got a very bad name from a modern point of view, both modern point of view with us and with the modern India. Because they say, once you get into a caste, you're stuck. If you are born to a laborer you must be. If you are born to a warrior, you must be a warrior or a ruler. You could never become a cleric. And we think that's pretty terrible. Because in our culture, we work under the assumption that you as an individual are free to choose whatever occupation you will follow. But unfortunately, this involves going to school. And for certain purposes, going to school is one of the worst things you can do. For example, if you want to become a completely fantastic expert carpenter, you have to begin the trade at the age of 7 at the latest. And your father, if he is a carpenter, is obviously the best teacher you can have. In a very ancient form of agrarian culture, as in India or as in Japan or China, a young man who was son of a carpenter would become fascinated with his father's occupation. And that would mean a very special relationship would grow up between him and his father, which does not grow up in our culture, because most of us do not know what our fathers are doing. They go away to a mysterious office or factory where they do something called making money as the main reason for the incidental occupation which they pursue there. But the children and the wife have no active part in that occupation whatsoever. They know Papa only as a kind of clown who returns home in the evening having made money, and one dad's money is the same as another dad's money. It makes no difference, except that everybody wants more. They don't give a damn how he gets it, so long as he doesn't complain too much. So the child, instead of learning and participating in his close father relationship, in learning an occupation or a trade or an art, is sent off to an impersonalized institution to be taught to be everything and nothing, and therefore doesn't learn early enough any craft so as to become a true master of it. What is happening, for example, in Japan, where a father can no longer apprentice his son at 7 years old to become a carpenter because he has to send him away to school to learn to be an insurance salesman. He can't teach his child, and then comes high school. And then when the kid gets out of high school, he's interested in girls. And it takes him until he's about 22 to be able to settle down to learn carpentry. And it's too late. Too late to attain real mastery. Because a great Japanese carpenter never uses a plan. He doesn't need a drawing. He does it all by eye. And can fit the most complicated joinery together by eye. And it's the same with the arts of weaving textiles, of making superb ceramics, jewelry. Any kind of gorgeous craftsmanship depends on beginning as a child. And so, all right, we can't buy it anymore in this country. There is not, on any kind of commercial basis, great craftsmanship available here. We have to go abroad to get it, to so-called primitive societies. We must be content with plastic simulation.
So let's start breaking down some of the specific points that you talk about in the book about the ways that people are basically conditioned in their school years, including conditioned to accept constant panopticon-like surveillance, conditioning to accept dependence on outside authority for validation of one's own self-worth, conditioned to basically submission to authorities, etc. So many different aspects of this. Let's start talking about some of those ideas.
Well, that's really what it comes down to. This is why I believe that school is harmful, and school has been harmful for generation after generation after generation and continues to be. And one of the most dangerous side effects or symptoms, like you were just saying now, is that It's so difficult for people to accept that truth. That is a condition of the conditioning in and of itself. Most of us grew up in this system. It's very hard for us to accept that our entire lives were a trick, that we spent 15 years of our childhood inside of a system that has tricked us. Or it's even more difficult for parents to accept that they are putting their children back into that same corrupt system. And I even speak to parents that are would consider themselves outside the box, quote unquote, or outside of the mainstream, and they will talk to me about politics, and they will talk to me about anarchy and 9/11 and vaccine issues or whatever other issues, controversial issues that are out there right now. So then I introduce the schooling to them, and all of a sudden that's shocking. So the conditioning runs so deep, and we really need to look at ourselves and say, okay, what have we done here? How damaging has this conditioning become to society and culture, and how long has it been going on?
We want to know, what do you think about the public school system, and what should parents know as they look at all these various problems like Common Core curriculum and numerous problems in the schools? What should they know, and what do you think about the public school system?
Well, on the one hand, you have what parents actually want. A parent concerned with their child wants their child to get a good education, to know what's going on in the world, to understand math, reading, history, whatever, so that they can get along in the world. And I think it's, most parents probably assume that the purpose of school is that, and it's not. And so a lot of people, when they look at the results that schools get, think, wow, this, it's not working. It actually is working, but it's to accomplish something completely different, which is not to empower and enlighten your children. It's more often to basically to train them to be obedient. And so the parent, the easiest thing is, well, I'll dump them off to an institution and hope the institution does a good job. Unfortunately, that is not at all the way that your child will be best served. If you actually want your child to be empowered and enlightened and curious, and you can actually, you can look up what the American school system is based on, the Prussian system. And if I told you what it was, you'd say that's a crazy conspiracy. Look up the Prussian indoctrination system. It's all public. It's not a secret. And you'll realize why the public schools do such a bad job, because they're actually doing a good job of something completely different. And as a parent, we unschooled our daughter, who's now 18, and it's a very different experience if you're not raising your child to be an obedient subject. You're showing them how to be a human being. They start out as little incompetent people, but they're already people. And they don't really need to be, trained to be this obedient robot. I think the moral way to look at your child is it's your job to help them become what they're supposed to be. And if you ask me, what they're not supposed to be is an unthinking, easily controlled, commodity. And so, I know a lot of people who assumed the schools were going to, be in the best interest of the children, but then they started looking into things like unschooling and different kinds of education, and they realized that when you figure out what best sort of feeds a child's interest and curiosity and lets them learn about the world, it looks very, very different from what the schools actually do. And it can be kind of inconvenient because you're going down a different route. It's like, well, the thing that everybody does is send your kid off to school. But unfortunately, if you really want to do what's best for your child, you have to go a very different route. And it cannot be done in a normal school setting. Teaching somebody to be a moral, responsible human being, it's really the opposite of what the schools teach, no matter how well-intentioned the teachers may be. I don't mean this is a big evil conspiracy and all the teachers are trying to be malicious. It's just the setting, the format, the template as it's been for centuries is not the way to create a physically and mentally healthy, productive, useful, compassionate human being.
Right away they start talking about education. That's the big answer to everything. Education. They say we need more money for education. We need more books, more teachers, more classrooms, more schools. We need more testing for the kids. You say to them, well, you know, we've tried all of that and the kids still can't pass the test. They say, oh, don't you worry about that. We're going to lower the passing grades. And that's what they do in a lot of these schools now. They lower the passing grades so more kids can pass. More kids pass, the school looks good, everybody's happy, the IQ of the country slips another 2 or 3 points, and pretty soon all you'll need to get into college is a fucking pencil. Got a pencil? Get the fuck in there, it's physics. Then everyone wonders why 17 other countries graduate more scientists than we do. Education! Politicians know that word, they use it on you. Politicians have traditionally hidden behind 3 things: the flag, the Bible, and children. No child left behind. No child left behind. Oh, really? Well, it wasn't long ago you were talking about giving kids a head start. Head start, left behind. Someone's losing fucking ground here.
So we are now on to educating people to conform to a pattern, become businessmen, scientists, writers, and so on. Education is not bringing about good human beings, good in the sense holistic human beings, beings who are not fragmented, broken up, and therefore they lead a life of contradictions, conflict, misery, all that follows. So we are asking, what is right education? Isn't it? Will education, that is, to teach people how to be good, is that possible? Human beings need to have knowledge. To be a good scientist, you must have knowledge. To be a good doctor, surgeon, you must have a great deal of experience, a great deal of study. So, as long as we are trained to be professionals, I don't see any possibility of being really free, holistic. So, education as it is now is really, if I may point out, it's rather destructive. And it's a very, very complicated subject, because there is on one side there are the parents who want all their children to be educated, to have good jobs, conform to a certain pattern, culture, society. And also at the same time, there are people asking that they must be free. The two are incompatible. So you have not only to educate the parents, you not only educate the educator and the student. It's a very complex process, education. And again, as we talked this morning, there are very few people who want to be really educated in the proper sense of that word. That means proper schools, proper universities, right kind of study. Is the cultivation of the mind, not cultivation of a particular subject.
Okay, the two questions were, the first was about compulsory education, which is basically imprisoned authoritarian indoctrination, at least completely immoral. There's actually, I've helped with some videos that Josie the Outlaw has done. One is called The Prison by Any Other Name. It is about compulsory education and how it isn't teaching people to think, it's teaching people to accept slavery. So my short answer is it's immoral. You don't get to imprison people just because they're little.
Well, in Hawaii this past year, we homeschooled our children, and we also coincidentally rented office space from a major company which creates homeschooling curriculums. And on their letterhead, they had the motto, "You are your child's best teacher." And we found out how hard it is to live up to that ideal. And yet, in a way, we also found out how rewarding it was to attempt it. When we return to Northern California, our children will go to public school. I think basically you have to not leave it up to the school. You have to check in on what's going on and input into the process. I don't feel that I can give a very deep answer to this. I think it's one of the most perplexing problems. One thing I think that's terribly wrong with education is that there is no sense of history instilled in people. And history has almost as bad a rap on it as mathematics. And yet these are the two modes of thought which I think would do the most to anchor us, because they both are about different forms of grounding. One grounds in eternal demonstrable principles, mathematics, and the other dissipates amnesia. It's a very weird thing that somebody can't tell you, isn't quite clear on whether event X happened in the 13th or the 16th century. I mean, after all, 13th, 16th, 19th, how would you like to be, so imprecisely perceived in somebody's mind that they couldn't get within 300 years of where you lived and died? So the lack of a sense of history makes us really prey to manipulation. That's why I am cynical enough to believe that the de-emphasizing of history that's gone on in American education over the past 30 years is almost the equivalent of a plot. The notion, even as recently as when I graduated from the university, and it took me 12 years, so I didn't graduate until 75, but the idea was that if you went to a university, you emerged a liberal, gentle person, well-informed on the accomplishments of your culture, its history, its aspirations, its ways of governing itself, its ways of resolving conflict, and so on. Now I think people these things have become gigantic trade schools, and you are expected to learn to do a job, and when not doing your job, malls have been provided for you to shop in, and 240 channels of garbage have been piped into your home for you to keep up on what it is that is au courant to go out and buy. And this creation of this historyless, mindless, consumerist person at the expense of the ideal of the democratically informed citizen is going to wreak great havoc in our society. People often compliment me on, my enchanting command of these various subjects and so forth and so on, and I'm amazed because what's being sold to you here tonight, ladies and gentlemen, is nothing more than the fruits of a liberal college education. You go to college, you learn about Gnosticism, Platonic philosophy, or you once did, but no more, apparently. So it can be sold as the most far-out, fringy thing in the new age. This is amnesia on quite a scale. So, and the other thing I would say in answer to your question about education is separating physical culture from competition. That the notion of physical culture, and by that I mean gym class, and competition is one of the, I feel the bile rising. This is, we're talking serious here now. Saving people from the grief of PE is, I think, a major way to heal the culture. When we were living in Hawaii, Kat asked our son, how did he think of himself? And he said he thought of himself as an artist and an athlete. And I thought that this was just an amazing breakthrough, because I thought of myself as, a sort of 95-pound weakling. And the notion that my son could be physically just like I was at his age, and yet conceive of himself as an athlete and have this balanced view of art, athlete, junior scientist, and so forth, meant we must be doing something right. And what it is stressing physical culture, being in the ocean, hiking, running, skateboarding, biking, all these things, without the notion of males crashing against each other for the purposes of racking up points with females and elders to lay the groundwork for the whole imposition of the alpha male primate hierarchy that makes society such a mess. So that's that.
There's a reason education sucks, and it's the same reason that it will never, ever, ever be fixed. It's never going to get any better. Don't look for it. Be happy with what you got. Because the owners of this country don't want that. I'm talking about the real owners now. The real owners, the big wealthy business interests that control things and make all the important decisions. Forget the politicians. The politicians are put there to give you the idea that you have freedom of choice. You don't. You have no choice. You have owners. They own you. They own everything. They own all the important land. They own and control the corporations. They've long since bought and paid for the Senate, the Congress, the state houses, the city halls. They got the judges in their back pockets. And they own all the big media companies, so they control just about all of the news and information you get to hear. They got you by the balls. They spend billions of dollars every year lobbying to get what they want. Well, we know what they want. They want more for themselves and less for everybody else. But I'll tell you what they don't want. They don't want a population of citizens capable of critical thinking. They don't want well-informed, well-educated people capable of critical thinking. They're not interested in that. That doesn't help them. That's against their interest. That's right.
And we're talking about the education system and what it does to children and how parents can escape that. And I think the first thing we have to do is challenge our assumptions and the conditioning that we've been talking about. So just before the break, we mentioned the idea of denormalizing the idea of schooling and education that we've grown up with, because it's so important to realize that, in fact, the compulsory education system that we've all just come to accept as the norm for human society has in fact only existed in its current form for a very relatively short time when we look at the time frame of civilizations. So, Lorette, let's start looking at some of that history. And for example, in the early 20th century, this was still something that was being argued about at the federal level. And you had people like President Wilson trying to argue for why we needed to have compulsory education. And he had some surprising arguments about that. Why don't we talk about some of this history?
Well, it was a business move. And most of the states at the time, we're talking about early 1900s, starting in the late 1800s, but at that time there was school, and a lot of people will say that to me too, and that's the argument. Oh, but school existed since ancient Greece and the days of Socrates, and that is true. But it was not the compulsory system that we have today, and it's very important that we understand this distinction between how children historically were educated, even formally educated, even if they were educated outside of the sanctity of their own family, how that happened throughout history and how it is happening in the artificial process that it exists within the last 100 years, specifically in this country. But we have to understand, first of all, that what the model that we're using now, the compulsory system that we're using now, is modeled after the German system, which was a vehicle for Nazi Germany before World War II. So that whole era, that whole section of humanity was conditioned to believe that what Nazi Germany was doing was the right thing. And they supported it. That's how, I read a book recently. I'm going to go into that for just 1 second so I can round this back. The book itself, it was written in a very mediocre way, but the idea was so profound to me. And it was, how do you kill 11 million people? And the message in the book, the answer was, lie to them. And that's basically how you do it. You lie and you tell people generation after generation after generation that this is education, this is good for you, this is good for your mind, and you let them believe that it's just a normal part of life. And here we are. Now, when we talk about all the things like you talk about on your show, James, and we are trying to develop solutions for all these things by spreading the truth, but let's ask ourselves how we got here to begin with. How did we get to this place where so much of humanity has just accepted all of these tyrannical things that are happening to us? And the answer is because we've been conditioned little by little by little to accept these things and allow them to happen. So in the early 1900s, the idea of this mandatory compulsory school system was introduced to the country. Most of the states were rejecting it. They thought it was a terrible idea. Education is a good idea, learning is a good idea, but forcibly taking children from their parents and making it mandatory that they must go to school and they must be in this system. And think about that too. Who is choosing what the children are learning? Who's in charge? It's not the parents anymore. It's the state. So now the state gets to decide what every single child is going to learn, how they're going to learn it, and what information they are going to have access to and what information will be kept from them. That is a dangerous idea, and I think people 100 years ago knew that. That's why they rejected it. Eventually it came to pass because the politicians that wanted to make sure that this happened got the businessmen at that time on their side. And if you remember, of course, in history, this was the time of the rise of the businessmen, the Industrial Revolution, and the heydays of Rockefeller and all of his friends. So President Wilson in 1909 gets together in a meeting with these businessmen, and he explains to them how it can benefit them and the future of their profit margins if they support this legislation. And he says to them, quote, "We want one class to have a liberal education. We want another class, a very much larger class of necessity, to forego the privilege of a liberal education and fit them to perform specific, difficult manual tasks. Meaning that we want to train workers to work for your companies to make you richer and be consumers and buy your products so that they will do exactly what we train them to do." And now, 100 years later, most parents automatically, compulsively, without questioning it, without thinking about it, say, "My child has turned 4 years old, I will drive them to school, or I will put them on a school bus." We don't question it, we don't think about it, we simply do it. And then you have parents that don't do it, and they're considered, of course, fringe and crazy. And think about that, James. I taught my own children how to read, how to write, how to spell, and now that they're getting older, I'm helping them learn about biology and chemistry and higher mathematics, and we're finding tutors, and we're learning ourselves with the help of our community, with the help of other family members. And yet I'm crazy, but the people that are compulsively putting their children on a bus.
It is a strange spot that we've arrived at, but again, it is part of that conditioning, and we keep stressing that word, but that's because that's so fundamental to how the system operates.
And the question a lot of parents ask themselves is, do I have the ability to homeschool or unschool? And most of them feel that they don't. And then the other concern is they don't want to ruin their child's life by doing something that's, non-mainstream. Can you talk to parents who are afraid of ruining their child's life by homeschooling or just doing something non-mainstream?
Yeah, there's several very common, worries. One is, they won't have any social skills. In school, you don't learn social skills. You learn to sit down and shut up. Whereas living life, because that's really what unschooling is. It's you identify, this is a small person. They don't know much. They don't know how to do much, but they learn how to be a human being from watch other people being human beings. Whereas a classroom is a completely artificial environment. You don't learn social skills there. You learn how to, be with a bunch of people who are just like you and sit still and not say anything. And then there's an authority figure that you obey. That's not what the rest of the world is. So one is like social skills, which we had no problem with our daughter Alyssa. She has a million friends and has her own social schedule all over the place. And then another one is like, will they learn things and will they... It's so much, if you are of the mindset that children don't care about anything and aren't curious and you have to like force them to learn things, not only is that not true, it doesn't even work. Like, if you let them pursue what they're interested in, and you can guide them and nudge them in directions, but if they want to learn, you know, a child who wants to learn something, they're going to learn it. You know, that's what a child's brain does, is it learns things. And I actually think school is like the best way to kill the desire to learn, is stick them in the chair and have them, you know, make them listen to things they don't want to hear. So in most cases, you're going to find that basically, if you unleash your child, they're going to learn things. And you can, like, you know, find mentors, and, you know, if you don't know that much about this subject, you find somebody who does, and they hang out with them, and they learn things. And, you know, there's literally 1,000 different ways you can do it. You don't have to know everything in the world to have your child, especially in the, you know, the age of the internet. You don't have to know everything in the world for your child to learn all sorts of different things about, you know, everything they need to survive and thrive in society. Basically, you just, you know, give them some resources, give them some nudges in the right direction, and make sure they're around people who actually know stuff, and especially let your children follow their interests. And I would point out, you know, the last concern people often have is, well, what if my child, like, is never interested in reading or never interested in that? People do things at different times, and that's not the end of the world. I mean, there are a bunch of people who are geniuses who didn't even talk until they were like 6. And it doesn't happen doesn't have to all happen at the same time on the same schedule. And again, children learn what they are interested in, and maybe right now they're interested in that thing, and later they'll be interested in reading. Like our daughter, when she decided she wanted to be able to look at these things and know what they said, she taught herself to read very quickly. We read to her and we showed her the sounds of the letters. Mostly she did it herself, a lot faster than they learn in school. So part of it is just having faith in your own child's curiosity and desire to learn. Help them, and mostly don't hinder them. And school mostly hinders them from learning what they want to learn.
Now, when I was at the university, I had a little trouble with this with the registrar. I still remember the 6-week mark when I was teaching at a university in St. Louis. Registrar comes to my office. Dr. Rosenberg, your grades have not been handed in. I said, you're very perceptive. Registrar did not like my humor. She repeats herself. Your grades have not been handed in. Yes, I'm well aware of that. Why? I'm choosing not to give grades. But you have to. Bureaucratic language, you have to. Isn't this foolish? She's telling me I have to. I haven't done it. Obviously, I don't have to, right? Can you hear anything crazier than that? A person telling me so. You have to. I said, I'm choosing not to give grades. Why? It's against my spiritual beliefs. Why? I said, half the students at this university are black, half are white. Blacks get 80% of failing grades. I choose not to participate in any evaluation scheme that differentiates on the basis of race or culture. Also, research shows that the more grades are given, the more students lose perspective on the worth of what they're learning. So then they learn not for the value of what they're learning, but for the extrinsic rewards, which of course is what is the purpose in a jackal culture. You want people to get used to working for extrinsic rewards, things like salaries, so they'll be able to pollute the environment or do anything else as long as their boss tells them to do it. And they get their reward, so that's what you want to train them for in schools. Well, this one, I said, the one area that they said, but we have to have accountability. I said, now that, I share the university's desire at that level. We do need to know whether people have learned what, the course involves. I said, I will give you at the end of the course of instruction a measurable assessment of what students could do at the end that they couldn't do at the beginning. In this respect, I'm far more accountable than a teacher who gives you a C or a D. You don't know what that student can do. you will know what each of my students can do at the end that they couldn't do at the beginning. So because of that, I was being more accountable. So they didn't fire me for that. They fired me because they didn't like my friends. I was working with street gangs at the time, and this was a college. We were preparing teachers to work in the inner city. And I had some members of the gang come into my class and educate the students. The students evaluated this session, incidentally, as very valuable, that they really learned a lot about why kids in the inner city weren't learning. But the university had a rule that said that these people weren't qualified to be brought in as guest lecturers. So it was on that basis that... that was not a problem. I wasn't expecting to stay around very long. The administrator that got me in there asked me to come in and kick ass a little and stir things up, and so. Well, he knew I wasn't going to last long, and I didn't really want to teach long. I just wanted to get some things started.
They don't want people who are smart enough to sit around the kitchen table to figure out how badly they're getting fucked by a system that threw them overboard 30 fucking years ago. They don't want that. You know what they want? They want obedient workers. Obedient workers. People who are just smart enough to run the machines and do the paperwork, and just dumb enough to passively accept all these increasingly shittier jobs with the lower pay, the longer hours, the reduced benefits, the end of overtime, and the vanishing pension that disappears the minute you go to collect it. And now they're coming for your Social Security money. They want your fucking retirement money. They want it back, so they can give it to their criminal friends on Wall Street. And you know something? They'll get it. They'll get it all from you sooner or later, because they own this fucking place. It's a big club, and you ain't in it. You and I are not in the big club.
I think the best way to raise a child, this is just my opinion, is from the beginning understand that it's a human being. And like I said, it doesn't know much, can't do much. But the way to show it how to be a proper human being is be a proper human being to the child, and they will learn by example, instead of sit there and I'm going to tell you how to behave. That doesn't work. They mimic. So if you want your child to be a good person in front of them.
But it is best understood by analogy with music. Because music, as an art form, is essentially playful. We say you play the piano. You don't work the piano. Why? Music differs from, say, travel. When you travel, you are trying to get somewhere. And of course, because being a very compulsive and purposive culture, are busy getting everywhere faster and faster and faster till we eliminate the distance between places. I mean, with the modern jet travel, you can arrive almost instantaneously. And what happens as a result of that is that the two ends of your journey become the same place. So you eliminate the distance, and you eliminate the journey. Because the fun of the journey is to travel, not to obliterate traveling. So then, in music, though, one doesn't make the end of a composition the point of the composition. If that were so, the best conductors would be those who played fastest. And there would be composers who wrote only finales. People go to a concert just to hear one crashing chord, because that's the end. Same way in dancing. You don't aim at a particular spot in the room. That's where you should arrive. The whole point of the dancing is the dance. Now, but we don't see that as something brought by our education into our everyday conduct. We've got a system of schooling which gives a completely different impression. It's all graded. And what we do is we put the child into the corridor of this grade system with a kind of, come on, kitty, kitty, kitty. And yeah, you go to kindergarten, and that's a great thing, because when you finish that, you'll get into first grade. And then, come on, first grade leads to second grade, and so on, and then you get out of grade school, and you've got high school, and it's revving up, the thing is coming. Then you're going to go to college, and by Jove, then you get into graduate school, And when you're through with graduate school, you go out to join the world. And then you get into some racket where you're selling insurance. And they've got that quota to make. And you're going to make that. And all the time, the thing is coming. It's coming. It's coming. That great thing, the success you're working for. Then when you wake up one day about 40 years old, you say, my God, I've arrived. I'm there. And you don't feel very different from what you always felt. And there's a slight letdown because you feel there's a hoax. And there was a hoax. A dreadful hoax. They made you miss everything by expectation. Look at the people who live to retire and put those savings away. And then when they're 65, they don't have any energy left, they're more or less impotent, and they go and rot in an old people's senior citizens community. Because we've simply cheated ourselves the whole way down the line. We thought of life by analogy with a journey, with a pilgrimage, which had a serious purpose at the end, and the thing was to get to that end. Success or whatever it is, or maybe heaven after you're dead. But we missed the point the whole way along. It was a musical thing, and you were supposed to sing or to dance while the music was being played. But you had to do that thing. You didn't let it happen. And so, in this way, the human being sometimes becomes an organism for self-frustration. Let's take Korzybski called man a time binder. That means that he's the animal peculiarly aware of the time sequence. And as a result of this is able to do some very remarkable things. He can predict. He studies what's happened in the past, and he says the chances are so-and-so of that happening again. So he predicts. Well, this is very useful to be able to predict, because that has survival value. But at the same time, it creates anxiety. You pay for this increased survival ability involved in prediction by knowing that in the end you won't succeed. You're all going to fall apart by one way or another. It might happen tomorrow, it might happen 50 years from now. But it all comes apart in the end. And people get worried about that. They get anxious. So what they gained on the roundabout, they lost on the swings. If you see, on the other hand, that existence, this is, as I said, my basic metaphysical assumption, which I won't conceal from you, that existence is musical in nature. That is to say that it is not serious. It is the play of all kinds of patterns. We can look upon different creatures as we look at different games, as we look at chess, checkers, backgammon, tennis. There's the tree game, the beetle game, the grass game. Or you can look at them as you look at different styles of music, mazurkas, waltzes, sonata, etc., etc., all down the line. There are all these different things doing their stuff. And they're going to do, to do, to do, to do, to who, to do, you know, in different rhythms. And we're doing that. If you were in a flying saucer from Mars or somewhere, and you came and looked, try and make out what was living on this world, from about 10,000 feet at night, or early morning, you would see these great ganglia with tentacles going out all over the place. And early in the morning, you see little blobs of luminous particles going into the middle of them. See? And then in the late afternoon or early evening, it would spit them all out again. And they say, well, this thing breathes. And it does it in a special rhythm. It goes in and out, in and out, in and out once every 24 hours. But then it rests a day and doesn't spit so much. It spits in a different way. That's a kind of irregularity. And then it starts spitting all over again the same way. Well, I say that's very interesting. That's this kind of thing we have. See? This is something that goes this way. You see? Now, existence, you see, is something that is spontaneous. The Chinese word for nature, ziran, means that which happens of itself. Your hair grows by itself. Your heart beats by itself. You breathe pretty much by itself. Your glands secrete their essences by themselves. You don't have voluntary control over these things. So we say it happens spontaneously. So when you go to sleep and you try to go to sleep, you interfere with the spontaneous process of going to sleep. Try to breathe, real hard, and you find you get balled up in your breathing. So, if you're going to be human, you just have to trust yourself to have bowel movements and go to sleep and digest your food. Of course, if something goes seriously wrong and you need a surgeon, that's another matter. But by and large, the healthy human being doesn't, right from the start of life, need surgical interference. And he lets it happen by itself. So with the whole picture, that is fundamental to it. You've got to let go and let it happen, because if you don't, you're going to be all clutched up. You're going to be constantly trying to do what can happen healthily only if you don't try. And when people, when you think a bit what people really want to do with their time, what do they do when they're not being pushed around and somebody's telling them what to do? They like to go, they like to make rhythms. They listen to music, they dance, or they sing, or they do something of a rhythmic nature, playing cards, or bowling, or raising their elbows. Everybody wants to spend their time swinging. That's the nature of this whole thing we're in, you see. It likes to swing. That's why it does it.